Welcome to Sense and Sustainability, your podcast channel for sustainable procurement. We hope you like what you hear. Please go to www.iso2400.org for more information, learning resources, tools and much more.
Before we begin, we would like to apologise for the poor audio quality in this recording due to background noise, which despite our best efforts could not be totally removed.
Hello, I'm Shaun McCarthy, Director of Action and Sustainability Community Interest Company, and it's my pleasure today to introduce Simon Henzell Thomas from IKEA. Simon, welcome.
Hey, Shaun. Nice to see you again.
Absolutely. Yeah, by way of a bit of background, Simon and I worked together an awful long time ago. Really, I suppose when the notion of sustainable procurement as a thing first started in the UK, really. And Simon was working for business in the community at the time, and I was working as in procurement at a big corporate. And some of the work that business in the community did discovered that there was a big hole in procurement and the way that procurement supports or doesn't support sustainability. And we started a group, or business in the community started a group, that eventually became something called the Strategic Supply Chain Group, and then eventually became the Sustainable Procurement Task Force in the UK in 2006. And the rest, as they say, is history. And Simon, your career, yours and my careers have taken slightly different directions since then. Can you take up the story from there? Tell us about your career and what you've done and how you've been involved in sustainability.
Absolutely, Shaun. And it's so nice to see you again. I had more hair back then, I think. It's been a few years.
So did I.
Yeah, I think we both did. Well, I mean, I think business in the community is a great training ground for anyone who knows the organisation, who wants to interact with businesses and how a business can have a positive impact when it comes to sustainability. So amazing, Shaun, with the organisation you used to work for. We had some great interactions, but leading FTSE 100, FTSE 250 businesses and how to take them on a sustainability path, that was such a privilege to be in that. I then sort of wanted to actually try what I'd learned and work actually in a business. So after I left you, Shaun, I went to the Body Shop in the south of England. We moved out of London and we went down to Arundel and Littlehampton on the south coast. And I worked for Body Shop, and it was just as Anita was still around back then. And it was just when L'Oreal had acquired the Body Shop, which was really interesting to see how L'Oreal approached that acquisition, particularly from a sustainability perspective, and how they had some really good values actually on driving sustainability and also letting the Body Shop bring that into a bigger company like L'Oreal. Then I convinced my wife to move to sunny Sweden and joined IKEA sort of 12 years ago. And we moved to Helsingborg, which is a beautiful little town in the south of Sweden. The weather is almost as bad as in the north of England, Shaun. I think it's quite a similar latitude. But I did a few sustainability roles in IKEA, and actually for 6 years I set the public affairs function up, so more focused on advocacy and working with policymakers, particularly around climate, which was really interesting. Actually, I'd never saw myself in a communication role, but it was a real good exposure to how policymakers work and how governments see this topic. And now I'm back in directing climate and nature for Inca Group, which is the largest franchisee to operate IKEA stores, based in the Netherlands. So I speak bad Swedish, bad Dutch, and my English is okay.
English is still okay. Yeah, so a couple of things to tease out there, Simon. You talk about your role in advocacy and dealing with governments. How do you see the tension or harmony between business and governments and how they see sustainability? And does that vary between government to government? You've obviously worked with a number of different governments around the world.
Yeah, I think this is so interesting, Shaun, because if you look at the transition that needs to happen, we're moving away from fossil fuels. So our economy is totally wedded to fossil fuels right now. If you look at things like subsidies and all the policy making that's happened has been to support a fossil fuel economy. And we need to transition away from that. And we need to do that really in 5 years now. 2030, we need to halve emissions. So there's a huge policy job that needs to be done. And a lot of progressive governments are looking at that. But they also need a signal of support from companies. So we call that it's like a loop, a progressive virtuous circle loop, where when companies announce that they're committed to 1.5 degrees in the Paris Agreement, when companies say that they would welcome policies that support that transition, that gives governments and policymakers almost a political cover to then, make those changes that we need to transform societies. Because, of course, they're also concerned with being elected and the next political cycle. So my experience is actually that policymakers are really open to hearing the challenges that we have in business, the opportunities, and how they can get policies that are good both for planet but also for people. Because we need to get those policies. It needs to be a growth economy. We want to see the economy grow, but we want to see it grow in a sustainable way. So I actually think that's a critical part of what we need to do if we're going to reach the Paris Agreement.
Yeah, I guess we're sort of touching on just transition as well there, aren't we? And the whole way how we can transition the economy and not leave people behind, because it seems to me like the tide is going in the right direction now. I mean, when I talk to people that will say, well, do you know what, even 2 years ago, sustainability was not really an issue for us. And now, they're all over it. And, things are changing very rapidly. So I guess with that momentum of change, there's always a danger that people are disadvantaged by that. And as usual, it's usually the poorest people in society. It's usually the global south that suffers, and the industrial north less so. What are your feelings about just transition and where we are with that as a topic?
Yeah, I think this is so important. Like I said, I live in the Netherlands, but I actually sneakily listen to Radio 5 Live. I managed still to get that on long wave here in The Hague. So I was listening to that this morning, and there's a big piece around electric vehicles as an example, where it's difficult when a sustainable option is more expensive, especially when we have a cost of living crisis, not just in the UK, but globally. And when we have high inflation, people have thinner wallets. And then at the same time, we're expecting them to pay more for sustainability. So I think one of the things at IKEA, because we're a company that is all about affordability, is how can we make sustainable options available at least the same price, if not even cheaper, actually. So I think that's a really big part when it comes to customer choices. And one example actually is plant-based food, which again can be quite a controversial topic, because in no way is IKEA trying to tell people that they shouldn't eat meat or what to eat. But what we've done is make delicious plant-based options available. So we're famous for meatballs, but we also sell veggie balls and plant balls, and now a plant-based hot dog. But really, really tasty food. And we actually made it at least as affordable, if not cheaper, than the meat alternative. And we did some good signage in store, not I would say heavy marketing, but we're now at 38% plant-based share across the globe. And in a country like France, which is a meat-loving country, it's up to 50%. So, and I think a big driver of that, I think, has actually been the cost. We also do this survey, Shaun, like every year with customers, where we ask them what they think about various things, including sustainability. And we find that around 2/3 of them are really worried about climate change. But the biggest barrier to them taking action is cost. So I think it's around 96% say that, if they can't afford it, of course they won't do it. It makes sense, doesn't it? So I think from a consumer perspective, we really need to bring everyone with us, because people vote with their wallets, don't they?
Absolutely. So you mentioned IKEA's business model, and you mentioned the word franchise. And when you and I spoke before this podcast, I know that. Tell us how it works.
Yeah, it's an interesting setup. So the IKEA that you know and love is actually a franchise. So Inter IKEA runs the supply chain. They source all the products. They design the amazing products that you can buy in store. And then there are various franchisees, and Inca, which is where I work, is the biggest franchisee. So 9/10 of the IKEA stores you go into are run by Inca, roughly. So it's around 90% of the volumes. And then there are other smaller franchisees that operate in places like Southeast Asia, Mexico, Colombia. We just opened in Colombia as well. So it is a franchise setup with one quite large franchisee in Inca. But that gives us some strengths in that we have a vertically integrated value chain. But it also brings some complexity, of course. But it does mean we have good influence over and relationships with our value chain.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, what's the business motivation for doing it that way? I'm fascinated to, because it does seem a bit weird. If you think of a franchise model like, McDonald's or Starbucks or whatever, that there are many franchisees. What's the benefit of having one very big one and a few very small ones?
Yeah, and I'm not sure if that was the intention. And I think that could also change over time with more franchisees coming into the fold. So Colombia is one good example. Falabella is one of the franchisees in South America doing amazing things, also in Chile. But I think the original purpose on a franchise system is to encourage entrepreneurship and also, to give some creative tension between two very different disciplines. If you think of sourcing is one discipline and selling is another one. And actually, they're not necessarily that connected. If you meet a purchasing manager versus a store manager, they're different animals, Shaun, as you know.
Very different skill sets, absolutely. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think there is something in that creative tension between the two.
Okay, excellent. No, thank you. So I think certainly I and most people that look at retail tend to look at IKEA as an exemplar, and you're doing some quite amazing things in as you say, trying to nudge the public towards.
Yeah, I think this is a really a big journey for us. I think the first thing to say is that the main objective is to integrate sustainability into all products. So it's very easy to design a incredibly beautiful, expensive chair. Any designer would love that, right? You have as much money as you want.
Yeah, very profitable as well.
Yeah, it can be as unsustainable as you want, but just make it, But the belief in IKEA is about what we call democratic design, which is basically that you need to think of form, function, you need to think of quality, you also need to think of affordability, but you also need to have a sustainability baked in. So there you have a challenge for a designer is how do you make a beautiful chair that you and I can afford, Shaun, anyone can afford, that is high quality, will last a good amount of time, and is also doesn't harm the planet. So I think that's the first entry point is that, all products should have sustainability baked into that. And that's a journey that we're on. I think then, there are some products that help customers more. So, for example, water saving taps. We've also been selling solar panels in store. So we call it clean energy services, which is actually a turnkey service solution. So we're offering that in the UK where you can go in and have your meatballs, and then you can walk out, with a solar panel deal under your metaphorical arm. And again, that's been doing quite well. But the challenge there is also affordability, because not everyone can afford, to do such a big project on their home. But the clean energy services is also something that we're trialing. Things like heat pumps in Sweden, for example, where we're actually also looking at, could we provide more general energy services to customers?
That's quite a diversion from what we would traditionally think of as a furniture store, but I can kind of see how it fits in terms of encouraging people towards a more sustainable lifestyle.
Yeah, and also if you're helping them save money in the long run, which you are with solar, it's a heavy investment cost, but then you also, of course, you bring down your energy costs. Yeah, and that's very IKEA, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on then, if we can, to a different topic, because we talked earlier about advocacy, earlier in your career, but these days you're quite a player on the world stage. You're getting involved in some of these global conferences around the world. What's your take on COP and the climate, the various climate groups that are coming together around the world?
Yeah, maybe if we look half glass empty first, then I'll look at half glass full. I think the half glass empty the outcome of COP29 in Baku was disappointing, to say the least. To come away with vastly less money than is needed for the developing world. These people are going to have them suffer the most and are suffering the most from climate change impacts. But they also want to develop their economies, and rightfully so for their people. They want to develop, and so these countries need to be supported. And as you know, Shaun, the deal that we came away with or was agreed in Baku just wasn't good enough. So I think that's disappointing. But it is a multilateral process, and sometimes you can have these painful moments. It is a stepping stone. So I'm hoping then in the future we can build on that and get a better deal for those countries that are going to have such a challenge. I was encouraged at COP to see some good NDCs. So for your listeners, Shaun, NDCs are, let's call them country climate plans. So, companies are setting targets, but countries also are doing that as well. And I've spent a few years, to be honest, being a little bit shy of being British on the world stage for various reasons, but I was actually really proud to see a good NDC from the UK, quite a good country plan, and some really ambitious goals. So I think that was a positive. Brazil also came through with quite a good plan. So there are some positives. I think the other half glass full part was, I think the COP processes have become much more inclusive. So I was in Colombia for the nature COP. So we also have a big nature negotiation as well as a climate one. It's the first one I've been to, actually. And there the voice of indigenous people was really, really present. Also because of where we were in Colombia. But you could see that throughout the negotiations. And it was somewhat reflected in the result. But again, we need to listen to indigenous people because they are custodians of a lot of land and they understand nature in an incredible way. So, yeah, I think there are some positives. We just need to remember it's a multilateral process.
Absolutely. No, it's good to hear an optimistic perspective because I must admit, like you, I looked at COP and thought, it's nowhere near enough. It's not even close to the investment that's needed to affect this carbon-free transition. But also, and I think you were being quite charitable, to be honest, and saying, yes, hopefully next time we'll get a better deal, and it's a process, but we're running out of time. I know that the whole, diplomatic political process on an international stage is very difficult. Things take time, and as you say, you get setbacks, and eventually you get there with some persistence. But the rate at which the climate change is affecting the world now surely should convince governments of the urgency to take some of these things forward. So it is frustrating.
Yeah, I agree with you, Shaun. I agree. It is. I agree, and I think also one thing that gives me hope anyway is that multilateral process is one vehicle for change. There are other vehicles, and what I see in the market actually gives me more hope. In that, despite worries about what might happen next in the US, I think you can see countries like China and also Europe as a whole moving incredibly quickly around deployment of renewable energy in particular. Investments in green tech, that I don't think will change because of a bad COP. And what would actually be amazing would if the market starts pricing all of this in, and then it's a runaway train, and then I think it's a race to the top. Then you have a situation where I think China, the US, and also Europe will be actually racing to deploy this technology as quickly as possible. So that gives me a lot of hope in addition to the COP process. And then, of course, multilateral agreement is important. But I think as soon as we make this competitive and this becomes a real business issue, then the market will take care of it.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I mean, it seems to me that businesses are doing what they do in spite of government in some cases. And, if we look at, without getting too political about the whole topic, if we look at what's going on in the United States, the big corporations, the Amazons and the Googles and the Microsoft and all of those people are steaming ahead with sustainable solutions. Doesn't matter who's in government, they're going to do it anyway. And I see things like CSRD, companies in the UK and in the States saying, well, we operate in Europe, so we're going to have to do this for our European operations. And there's no point in not doing it across the piece. I was working as a consultant quite recently with a big international glass manufacturer, and they're having to implement the German due diligence regulations, which are the most stringent in the world. And once again, they said, well, okay, this now is what we do. And they're very big into the United States, supplying to the United States auto industry. And one of the comments I got back from one of their senior execs was, even General Motors are asking for this now. Whereas the European car manufacturers have been driving sustainability agenda for the last 10 years. It's starting to gather momentum globally. And interesting what you say about affordability and the challenges in there. What these guys are saying is, we're being pushed very hard buying BMW by Renault and Mercedes and all of those, the big European manufacturers, but they don't want to pay anymore. And, they want to pay the same and they still want a sustainable solution. Yeah.
Yeah. And I can understand that. And, like any innovation curve, Shaun, we always know that new technology is more expensive at the beginning when you lack infrastructure, you lack investment, you lack consumer take-up. But as soon as you pass that point, everything becomes scaled and affordable. So, and actually, if you look at renewable energy as an example, renewable energy used to be expensive, and the price is actually very low now. Which also has its challenges, by the way, if you're looking for investment. But I think that's where we need to get to with a lot of this green tech. But if you look at some of the hard to abate sectors, they're at the beginning of that innovation curve, actually. So there will be some pain where some of this technology needs investment, but ultimately it has to be affordable. Otherwise, it simply won't scale. So that's the biggest challenge, yeah.
And you're right. I mean, it's interesting to say that you still listen to Radio 5, so you pick up the news in the UK. And of course, today's debate in the UK is all about the auto sector and government placing targets for zero emission vehicles in the manufacturer. But the sector is saying that, the public's not ready for this. There isn't the demand. So you're telling us to make vehicles or more vehicles than people are prepared to buy. And that's not good policy making, and it's not good business. So to your point about, it needs to be profitable, it needs to be affordable. So in this particular case, it appears that the way in which government is placing targets on the automotive sector doesn't work, because they can't make cars and leave them in a field just to satisfy a government quota. That doesn't work for the sector. So it's really interesting that this kind of juxtaposition between business and government. In some cases, businesses are able to, on their own initiative, to create more sustainable solutions that make good business sense. But then in other instances, government policy gets in the way. It doesn't work.
Yeah, and if I look at our own zero, so we have a goal in IKEA around zero emission delivery. So after the pandemic, actually, especially, we've been growing our online share quite steadily. Like any retailer, we're moving to being omni-channel. Of course, we'll always have our physical stores, but we also have quite a growing online share. And then, of course, you have delivery for that. And so you've got a commitment that by next year, 100% of those deliveries will be zero emission delivery. And that's actually been one of our most challenging goals. The business is working so hard, but you've seen what's happened in the EV market this year. You have challenges with infrastructure, you have challenges with availability of vehicles, and you also have challenges with cost as well, which is easier for a business than it is for your average consumer. But that, despite a lot of work going into that, I think we're going to struggle to hit 100% by next year. We doubled the share this year, so we're at around 40% now. And then hopefully by the end of this year, we'll be at 70. So, and then let's see where we end up. But I think the important part with that is you do need policy that supports that movement, but you also need consumers and the infrastructure. And so it's a whole infrastructural move of a sector. And of course, there'll be bumps in that road because you can't change the entire mobility sector, without any challenges. So I remain optimistic that this will come out, and by 2030, we'll, as a society, will be much closer to electric mobility. But it will take governments and businesses working together.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, that's an incredibly ambitious target. Is that the whole logistics chain that you look into zero emissions?
Yeah, we've also got goals around electrification through the long haul and the medium haul, but this is just what we call last mile mainly, which is the delivery from the warehouse to your house. Yeah, and it's often in cities, and of course, this is also just coming back to as a business opportunity. Many cities are closing their doors anyway to diesel and petrol vehicles. So if you look at Paris and other cities, so this is also an accessibility issue, that in order for us to be able to deliver into cities, we need to move to zero. We want to, because it's part of our carbon goals, but it also is a business makes business sense, because if you want to deliver in the centre of Paris by 2035, you're going to need to be delivering an electric vehicle. And actually, subject close to your heart, Shaun, the Olympics, we also know that we have this amazing program in Paris where we're actually delivering on the River Seine using electric barge delivery. And of course, during the and there are many the main driver behind that was CO2, because we could significantly reduce the CO2 and go zero emission. But of course, during the Olympics, when everyone was stuck in traffic jams, we're still able to deliver on the river. So it's business sense as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, we used the Thames quite a lot for London 2012, but there weren't electric barges then, and there weren't electric cars for the fleet, or at least they were in their infancy. So the technology has moved on so much. But actually, my experience of London during the Olympics is everybody stayed away. London was really quiet.
I did actually hear that about Paris. I did go to one. I took my boys to see the hockey because the field hockey, because I'm living in the Netherlands and my youngest son's playing hockey. But yeah, the traffic was actually quite good. You're right. So yeah, still good to go by river if you can, I think.
But absolutely, it's great. And as I say, London 2012 was a long time ago now. And the run up to it, as you know, we started the whole process of designing the facilities, etc., after the bid was won in 2005. So that's very nearly 20 years ago. So the way that the technology has moved on since then has been quite astonishing, and things that we just couldn't do back in the day can certainly be done. And I think Paris has done some great things.
Yeah, and I think with electrification, I think, the problem is not in cities. The challenge comes if, over longer distances, if you're in a more of a rural environment where, of course, charging infrastructure is not as mature. But in most cities, that won't be a problem by 2030.
No, absolutely. No, you're right. I mean, I was doing one of these podcast calls yesterday, as it happens, with a guy in Edmonton in Canada, and he runs a business that extracts precious metals from catalytic converters. And they're quite a unique business, and they invented a process. They were getting precious metals out of e-waste, but weren't making any money out of it. And eventually, they teamed up with a scrap company in the United States, and now they get the precious metals out of catalytic converters. And I said, well, how do you see the future of your business? Because vehicles are going zero emissions, and there won't be exhaust pipes anymore. You don't scrap a truck. You buy a truck today, you're not going to scrap it for another 15 years. And also, he said, if you look at where we live, vast distances in Canada, minus 30 temperatures. And he was telling me a story about, I think his mother-in-law or somebody had a Tesla and just, got less than 100 miles of range out of it. And it just took her hours and hours to get anywhere because she had to stop and charge the damn thing.
Exactly. We'll need a palette of solutions, and I think electrification is a very important one. But there are other technologies that will emerge. Absolutely.
Yeah. Electrification is the technology that's available now. We know it works. It's proven. It's not new anymore. The technology, the range is improving all the time. I've had an electric car for 5 years now, or 2 different electric cars, and they do improve all the time, and that's amazing. Simon, that was fascinating. It was really great to catch up with you again, and I think we've given a number of broader issues a good going round. Is there anything you'd like to add before we close?
No, thanks, Shaun. It's been lovely to chat with you again. I think I would say that I always believed this, and I really do believe it now, is that sustainability is the right thing to do, and that's why I'm in it, and it's why many people believe in it. I think you're the same, Shaun. You want to kind of leave the planet better than you have it now. But I also really believe it's the future of the economy. And this makes business sense. And sometimes things might not add up today, but they will add up tomorrow. So I think is how do we make that business case really, really strong? Because if we don't make it a business issue, then the economy won't move. And that's where we have the real impact. You don't want 5 or 6 companies doing it because it's good for them. We need it to be a scale movement across the whole sector. So I don't know, that's my kind of the badge that I wear every day when I'm going into meetings. This is good for business.
Yeah, absolutely. It has to be. And And I think we're getting to a world now where it is good for business. I mean, when you and I were first doing this, and when I was doing it in the 90s, probably before you were doing it, it was hard. The only weapon you had was risk. There might be some reputation risk if you get caught doing something bad, and that's all gone now. And the attitude is totally different. So, yes, we'll end on an optimistic note, which is fantastic.
Brilliant.
Thanks very much, Simon. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Shaun. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to our podcast on Sense and Sustainability. Please listen out for more episodes. For more information, learning resources, tools, and much more content on sustainable procurement, go to www.iso2400.org.